So now that we have the UI for our form in place, let's get started on adding the validation. But before we do the validation, the way I have things set up, we do need to create the database and its schema before we could set up the validation, since it's somewhat dependent on it. So let's do that now, and you shall see what I mean by that. So we're going to create a new folder called database. Oh, I already have the stuff in. Okay, yeah. So yeah, that and database.db, we'll call it. Whoa, what am I doing? Not db, database.cs. Oops. CS, there we go. There we go. And we're just going to install a few packages, some of which we already have installed, but I'll just show you guys for demonstration purposes. We're going to install Better SQL. That is the library that we're going to use for SQLite and act as our local DB. And we're also going to use our ORM, Drizzle in this case, to just be able to have that nicety of not having to hard code SQL syntax, and also be able to have autocomplete with when we're defining and setting the structure for a database. So that is that. Let's, what do you call that? Import the stuff in. Oh, forgot to say, we want to call this .server. The reason why I renamed this file to include a .server in the extension is any file that is .server would only be able to run in the server. If you try to import it in the client, SvelteKit will let you know that that is an issue and it's going to error out. And the reason for that is you don't want to accidentally include vital information in the client to be visible by others. So that is just for safety reasons that we are specifying this. We could actually give an example. So let's see, export const my name is Edwards. And if we try to import that, my name is, if we look back at our thing, we're going to see that it arrows out. We cannot import my name is from that server into the client code. So that is that. And let's get our database out. So we're going to import a few things. From the Better SQL library, and we're just going to import database. We're also going to import the Drizzle function for SQLite, or Better SQLite, and more particular, Better SQLite. And from there, we're going to create the SQLite client. We create a new instance of that DB. And let's see, SQL. Awesome. So yeah, this, what do you call it? Only takes, it takes a couple of things, but the first parameter is the path to your file. So that's the export const. Now we're going to pass that to Drizzle function, which is just that. And so now that we have the database in place, we could then create a schema for it. So schema.cs, and then let's see, for the schema, we want to export const users table equal SQL. There we go. And I'll walk through this once I am done writing everything else. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is a function to create a table that is specific for SQLite, which better SQL uses SQLite, so that's why we're using this function in particular. And the first parameter it takes is the name of the table in the database. And the reason why I call this users and not just user is because it's a lot more descriptive. For my sake and probably future coders' sake, because there could be a user's store, right, for state. There could be just a plain user's object. So I feel it's good to be able to write something that's a bit more descriptive to be able to distinguish between that. And now we're about to, the second parameter is the list of rows for that table, which we're about to define now. We're actually going to import this thing as well from the core. And one sec, let me just write this out. So the text function we just imported, it's to indicate what type of column this is. So the ID is a type of text, and within it, we're passing the name of how the column is going to be viewed or displayed in the database. This ID is just for our sake to be able to access it from our application, but this ID name here within that's specified within the function is for the database viewing itself, which we'll see later. And we going to specify this to be a primary key. And also we want to make sure this has a default value. Now there is default.fm and default and just plain default, but we want to use let's see, let me just finish writing this out. Thank you. But from my experience, I had issues using just the regular default for unique IDs. I kept getting an error when I would try to create a new user that there's a duplicate in ID, and we can't do that since the primary key is supposed to be unique. But I don't get that issue with default.fm, so that's why I'm using it here. And yeah, this function, it just sets a default value for that column. In this case, we want to set a default UUID whenever a user gets created. So that's going to be done at the database level rather than us having to specify this at the application level. And then we're going to get the rest of the columns, just name, and not null means that it can't be null, it can't be empty, it's a required value, and email and password. Also, the reason we don't specify not null for the ID is since it's going to have a default value, it's automatically not going to be null. So that's why we didn't need to specify it there. And finally, we're just going to do the created at. Let's actually correct this a bit. There is a convention for database to use, I believe it's called camel case, this type of variable writing here. So I'm just going to stick with that for now, and then I'll explore it in the future whether or not that is actually necessary. I personally prefer snake case for most things since it's more readable, but in some cases I don't think it's applicable. But we're going to also import, there we go, in this SQL function for the current timestamp. So this is just used to execute certain SQL specific functions, and such as in this case to create a default current timestamp for our created at column. And that is it for our table definition, our users table definition. We just have to do one last thing for this file, which is to create a user insert schema type, which I'll explain why after I write this out. Type of users table dot insert schema. Awesome. So we're going to use this when we are in when for our insert new users function, which we're going to create later on. But it's just easy to automatically create a type, a user's type, by being able to infer it through Drizzle's infer function. Sorry, infer property. It allows us to kind of do that pretty easily without having to define a whole new type ourselves. And it's pretty smart in its inference. Real notice how we have the ID and also the created at those, since those have default values when we're actually creating the user. Um, these two columns are optional because we don't need to provide a value for them since they're going to be created automatically at the database level. So that's some nice inference that it did, and that is about it for the most part. Right, so the other thing we're going to do is we want to create a Zod schema for the validation. But before we do that, well, what is this? Am I still getting an error? Okay, yeah, we gotta actually create the database. So, well, the location of the database. So let's do a new folder. Oh, we have this already. That's weird. Let me see. Huh? How come I don't? Oh, that's why. Okay. So let's do that, and that should take care of the error. Let's see, database.server.cs. Well, let's see if once we do a migration and also push that information to the database, if we still get that issue. So we're going to install, what is it? What are we installing? We're going to install SvelteKit, and this is to use the Drizzle CLI for migrations and also different push and pull database methods. And we're going to run this command right here. By the way, the PN, it's just an alias that I have set up for PNPN. So that is what that is. And this is the syntax of the command drizzlekit, and we want to generate this is going to generate the migration, and we specify that it's of type SQL. For different types of databases, you would specify a PG for Postgres and so on. So we're just going to run that to generate the migration file. And if we pull that up here, we see the migration file. We actually forgot one thing that I noticed. We need to, in the schema, oh no, in the schema, we did not set the email to be unique. So we're going to run the migration again, and it's going to include that information and the new migrations that I generated. Awesome. So yeah, that just created a migration to the DB, and now we're going to push the information into the DB itself, and from there we get our database file. And it has the table that we had specified. Awesome. So now we should not have that error that we were having before that was saying it requires the migration information, or the migration file in particular. So that's awesome. Things are back up and running. We do not need this anymore at this point. We don't need this. We're done with that, and we don't need this. So the next step is, let's clear that out as well, is we want to create the Zod schema for the validation. So let's just do that now. So it's going to be called register user Zod schema. That's yes. And then with this, we're going to export a function. This function is going to be called register user. Well, it's not. It's an object that gets created from this function. And we're going to say equal insert schema. not getting autocomplete from here, so let's just import it manually, which is, oh, that's why. Yeah, we also have to install this neat library from Drizzle to be able to use Drizzle and Zod. So let's do Drizzle Zod and create insert schema. Let's see, and then we could just do insert schema, and that's going to take the users table as its first argument. Well, as its first parameter in this case. And from there, I think we are good. So we'll leave things as is for now. We'll come back to this later. We're going to have to do a few extra work, but we will revisit that.